This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. In each episode, we bring you information, insights, ideas, and interviews from some of the industry's top thought leaders. Head to mediasalesmastery.com to help pick the topic and guide the show.
This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. In each episode, we aim to bring you information, insights, and interviews from some of the industry's top thought leaders. I'm your host, Jamie Wood, and our guest today is Janelle Shinners, Business Strategy Director at Ikon Communications, Brisbane. Now, Janelle's someone I've worked with in collaboration over 9 years now, across multiple projects and multiple clients. It's worth highlighting that Janelle's experience is almost exclusively in the agency side of media, and being someone who has a very comprehensive understanding of not only data and insights, but also how all media publishers and media salespeople typically package and present this data in market. Janelle is the perfect guest for today's topic of data tells, but insight sells. Janelle, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jamie.
So I couldn't think of anyone better to get on the show to talk about this subject than yourself, because I feel like whenever we catch up and talk about, I suppose, research and insights and data, you're somebody that just loves to really get into the nitty-gritty of it, and you have a very strong opinion on, I believe, what the difference is between the two and why data is so important in informing insights. And I guess I was just curious to hear your opinion on why this is so important for media salespeople to have a good comprehensive understanding of.
Yeah, I think it's really important because data only gets you so far. It's actually understanding how your idea will influence human behaviour that helps sell the idea. That's why I think, insight sells. After all, we market to real people, not pixels.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I think that whole idea of data tells, insight sells, it's a bit of a quirky title, but it's so true, isn't it?
It's very true.
Yeah, I mean, I look at data. Data to me, particularly at the moment, people are getting very romantic about data and they're really thinking about it in terms of, what are the data inputs into my business? But data's not a strategy. It's about how do we actually use that to inform and to govern our thinking and to be able to bring insights to life. So I want to jump into this, but before we do, just so the audience has a bit of an understanding, I guess a little bit about yourself, we're going to jump into the first five.
The first five.
So Janelle, first thing to cover off, where did you start in media?
I started in a full service agency, fairly small agency, got to do everything from copywriting, creating the ads, and then also managing media across Australia and New Zealand for a fairly large property group at the time.
Wow, very cool. And so what would be your favourite thing about the media industry?
My favourite thing is the variety. It's the variety in people. It's the creativity in people. It's the variety of industries that you actually get to touch and learn from. I mean, that for me ensures that I'm learning something new every day, and it's the thing that I thrive on. It's what keeps me going in this business.
And, when you say keeps you going in this business, it's fair to say this is a fast-paced, high-demand industry we're in. And a lot of the people that we're creating this podcast for are people in that first anywhere from 18 to 36 months to 5 years of their journey in media sales. And we know collectively that's where the industry has a really high attrition rate. It's usually the making or breaking of people. And this podcast is really for those people that are in that critical stage. I want to know from you, did you ever want to get out of the industry? Did you ever want to quit?
You know what? If I said no to that question, I'd be flat out lying. The industry can be really tough. It is deadline driven. There's always incredible pressure to be creative at a very high level, which can be difficult to sustain. And you know what? We're all only human. Sometimes that gets to you. But what I would say to those starting out is, things like holiday and taking time out for you are really important when you're going to perform at your best and be that best version of yourself. If you don't look after yourself, you can't be at your best. And it's also, taking a fairly pragmatic view and being incrementally better than you were yesterday. You don't always have to be a world beater every single day of the week. It is that incremental improvement. So be a bit kind to yourself as well.
I like that. I really like that. I suppose from your perspective, you typically see the media salespeople come in and engage the agency or engage your clients or potentially come and have a dialogue with you around some high-level strategy. And you've always been on the side of the fence of having these media salespeople come in. And I suppose over the years, you've probably seen a vast array of different approaches, different styles, people that are at a different stage in the journey. So I want to know from you, Janelle, What skills do you think somebody needs to master in order to be a real professional at media sales?
Yeah, so I've got 3 things that I'll talk to. The first one is emotional intelligence, and I actually think that's the biggest one. Selling is about people. So in my view, to be great in sales, you need to understand the people that you're selling to. You need to understand them, their business, their KPIs, their pressure points, and how you can actually help them. Not the other way around where you go, oh, I've got something to sell, who's going to buy it? So that human understanding is really important. The second one I would say is the ability to really listen. Like, we have 2 ears for a reason.
Yeah.
And that helps you understand, who you're selling to. What does this person need to achieve? How am I in a position to help them? Being helpful. Presenting would be the third one that I would say. Do it with pride, do it with confidence, and do it with authenticity. Put some of your own personality into it, because it really shows when you're not authentic or you're reading from a script that's just being given to you.
You know what I love about that is that, in building this podcast, there's a few people around the world that I've actually been able to reach out to and to talk about different things. Those are 3 disciplines we're covering off in upcoming episodes. So you nailed that one. We're going to jump into the main topic now.
Media sales mastery.
Okay, so we're into the main topic of data tells, insight sells, which I just love. It's so good when it rhymes like that, but it actually makes sense. So Janelle, we covered it off at the start around why it's so critical to have a good comprehension of how to actually formulate or how to use insights to validate a solution that you might be selling into a client, or to inform the direction you're taking, or just to generally have a good understanding of human and consumer behavior and how they engage in your channels with your medium. So what I want to know from you is, what's the clinical difference between data and an audience insight?
Yeah, sure, Jamie. Data is usually expressed as a statement of fact. It's things like 60% of our audience listen to radio at breakfast, or 30% of mums say they'd never buy fast food for their kids, or 80% of tradies drive utes. Whereas an insight is a story in the data that tells us something about the way people behave and why they do what they do, or why something is happening. It essentially transforms that fact into a feeling. For example, tradies choose utes based on how tough it makes them look, not how tough it drives.
It's a great one. So you've got dogs.
Yes, I do.
One of the best examples I've heard of the difference is to go, the data's telling us that 90% of people feed their dogs twice a day. And the observation is that the majority of them feed their dogs in the morning and in the evening. The insight is actually that people feel guilty eating their dinner in front of their dog. So that one to me was always one of those really good examples of the best way to explain probably some of the differences. And I think when you think about that, thinking about that whole guilt of leaving your dog behind or eating in front of your dog, that unlocks a completely fresh perspective when you're coming up with a solution, or a completely different way of probably attacking the problem, doesn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely does.
Excellent. Well, I love that tradie one. You're absolutely right. There's a whole, when you start getting into that sort of blue collar male area in particular, there's some really interesting insights and some really interesting dynamics that are at play there around why they choose the tools and the beverages and all the different kind of things that they do as part of their process. It's often not around the utility of things, is it? There's a bit more of a...
That's only part of the story, I would say.
Well, let's think about the term insight. I mean, I think it's probably one of the most mislabeled and one of the broadest kind of definitions that people can have around a word. Like, people use insight all the time, and oftentimes they're not really producing an insight. So why do you think it is so commonly misinterpreted what an insight actually is?
I think it's just a broad overused term. I think people confuse fact with observation, and blanket that with insight. Finding a great insight is actually, it's like looking inside your fridge. When you open the fridge, a light comes on. It's the same with finding a great insight. You inherently know it because it's a light bulb moment.
Yeah. And so that's the hard part for me too, because if you were to say, can you standardize a process around producing an insight? I don't know. The jury's out on that for me. It seems to me that it can come from anywhere, and oftentimes it has to be that eureka moment. There's no set path to getting to an insight. Is that your experience?
That is my experience. I think a lot of the things that we do is we keep asking why. It's like, if you've got anyone has young children, like the 2-year-old in the back of the car that's asking you, why is that, mummy? Why is that, daddy? You keep on asking why. Why is something the way that it is until you unearth that eureka moment, as you identified.
Okay. When we think about insights, you're talking about it being like that deep human truth.
Yep.
Does it always have to be a consumer insight? Like, are there other types of insight around industry or category or product or things like that?
My view is that it needs to have a human element. Great marketing begins and ends with people and influencing their behaviour. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it is a human being that we are trying to influence. People buy and live in category and culture, so great insights actually unite the truth across category and culture and consumer. And I would say things like competitive are a subset of category.
Okay, so when you're talking about it always kind of comes back to the consumer. Mm-hmm. I think that's a really, really good sort of framework for people that are listening that are, media salespeople, because oftentimes we sell, we have inventory at our disposal. And when we really think about it, what we're actually selling for the most part is audience and certain, I suppose, trying to unlock certain nuggets of gold out of that audience to go, here is, 100,000 Brisbane people, but let's find something unique about them in terms of their attributes or their profiles, and let's find some sort of deep human truth that we can then use to craft our response to this brief, but to also to validate it. And so I think when we start thinking about, best practice when it comes to like insight-led media solutions for people, is there anything, and I don't want you to give away any specifics, but is there any example in recent memory where a media supplier has kind of come and presented a response to brief that's had a really, really good insight at the core of the solution?
Yeah, so I can't give away a specific example, but I think in all my years of experience, the best ones that I've seen, there's a process that they've followed. And that process is when you actually sit down and chat about the brief, they explored that in person and really listened to what was required and confirmed understanding before they started, brainstorming and maybe going off brief or going off track. They use collaboration really well as a mechanism in that they'll take the brief, they understand the brief, and then they come back to you with a few ideas and go, hey, we're thinking of this or we're thinking of this. How do you feel that's aligned? Collaborate with us to give us a bit of direction. The next thing I would say is they've created a bespoke solution based on what you've needed, or at least they make you feel that way. It feels that way, yeah. It feels that way. It's that alignment to the overall business strategy that is really important, where they haven't necessarily gone and come up with a completely different strategy that's opposite to where the business wants to go.
Yeah.
The other thing they do really well is they add to the research that you already have and demonstrate why this idea works, usually through effectiveness case studies or usually through testimonials from other clients who may have tried similar types of things. The final thing is they don't price themselves out of the market. There's a value equation there that stacks up to the idea.
In that sense, what you're talking about there is it feels bespoke. It feels like they've taken the strategy, they've taken the brief, they've taken potentially the insights that you've provided, but they've been able to take that and run with it and expand upon that, but then also validate that with a proof point like a case study, like a testimonial,
yes,
like a research article.
Yes.
When we're talking about, I suppose, media suppliers that work in, well, I'm not going to say commoditized categories, but I'm going to say competitive categories like broadcast television, when they're coming back with a response to brief. And let's say we're talking about a really, really simple, straightforward brief that's just around, I just want reach and frequency. In your view, and I'm throwing this to you on the spot, but in your view, if a TV network was to come back and say, look, here's your reach and frequency, but here's an interesting audience insight, or here's an interesting nugget of gold around the audience behavioural habits or their attitudes or some other element that could add a little bit of colour to those reach figures, do you think that would be enough to differentiate that supplier over another one?
Number one is you've always got to meet the brief.
Sure.
Do that first and foremost.
Yep.
If you don't meet the brief, you're wasting people's time. So don't do that.
Yeah.
The second part is, if as part of that process you come up with a really interesting insight or a really interesting idea, position that as, okay, you briefed us on reach and frequency. We believe we've delivered on that. But you know what? We're really interested in this project and we've thought about these other ideas and we'd love to share that with you. Certainly don't use that as a tool to try and sell in the reach and frequency. It's an add-on.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to clarify, because to my mind, you do have certain people who might get a bit overzealous and go, you know what, the brief is just about maximizing reach and frequency. To some extent, that's what you've got to come back and do. Don't take too many liberties with that, because the brief is fairly prescriptive. So when we talk about picking our targets for this type of response, it just seems to me that there's got to be an appetite from the agency and or the client to see something a bit more bespoke for us to be able to do that, isn't there?
Yeah, there definitely does. And that comes back to, like I was saying up front, when you're going through the brief itself and you're asking questions, ask those kind of questions if there's an appetite for that. Because certainly if there's not, at least you know up front you don't waste your own time going down that rabbit hole and not getting a return for it.
No, and that makes perfect sense. I think when we talk about insight generation, maybe there's a bit of an attitude out there or a feeling out there that has to sit with the strategy team, or that has to sit with a particular person in the business. We often talk about creativity in media businesses, and some people seem to think it's kind of relegated to people who have some sort of title like integration specialist or content or journalist, or even looking sort of between editorial and commercial. And my view's always been that creativity is everyone's responsibility, and everybody has the ability to contribute to the creative process. Would the same be said for insight generation?
I completely agree that it would be. And I think the thing about insight generation is it's practice.
Yep.
It's practice, 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 practice. I'm still practicing every day, and hopefully I'm getting better at it every day. There are things that people can look at, like little workshops, whether that's through the Media Federation or the Communications Council, or even short courses online that give you that ability to just keep practicing, keep trying, embrace a growth mindset and give it a go.
And so I guess you really answered the next question I was going to have, which is, if it is a skill you can learn, how can you practice? And it sounds to me like there's any number of different ways that you could actually really increase your skill, or you could enhance your skill set in terms of generating insight. And going back to that point earlier around just being able to ask the question of why and just continuing to dig and just having an inquisitive mindset, that seems to be a big part of it to me.
Yeah, it definitely is. It is that continuous process of asking, why is that? Well, why is that? Why is that? Like the 2-year-old child that I referenced earlier. You've got to keep digging, and it's inherent. You inherently know when that aha moment, because it's almost like it's something that doesn't need to be said because people know it to be true.
Yeah. And do you feel like that if let's say you're presenting a strategy or a strategic direction to a client, and there might be a consumer insight that you've pulled out that you present, is it almost like to really see it landing, is there almost like that light bulb moment in the room where everybody just kind of accepts it to be true? Or do you find that you need to validate this with data?
Usually you take a client on a journey and you validate it with data, but once you actually then unpack that and you get to the key insight, there's normally a lot of head nodding and an agreement, because people know, oh yes, that's absolutely true. But in today's day and age, with data, you actually need to use that to support how you've arrived at where you've arrived.
Right. Okay. So that's a really interesting point, because I completely agree. I think when you're talking about multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars that are going to get invested in your media channel, having a great insight, can certainly help inform some creativity and can certainly help validate your logic behind coming up with a solution. But ultimately, having a bit of data support there can really, I suppose, backsell the idea, or almost give them assurance that you've done some due diligence to arrive at that insight.
Yeah, in today's world, data is the new oil. There is no excuse for not having some kind of data to back up what you're selling.
So I guess in a market that can be very price and value led, meaning that you might have multiple media suppliers that offer fundamentally the same product, how can insights help media salespeople actually differentiate their products and potentially command, I'm not going to say command a premium on price, but maybe just differentiate what they're doing enough to increase their win rate on responses to brief and on proposals they put forward?
Yeah, sure. So great ideas bred from good insight help to create a stronger value proposition. In theory, a great idea can actually be more effective. So to me, it's how media salespeople help prove that that idea will be more effective beyond price and perceived value. So things like your case studies, if it's been done before, or testimonials from other clients certainly help to prove that case. But also you need to balance out the pricing equation and making sure that you're not being too greedy and going for a big price premium.
Great. All right. Well, look, that's a really, really good summary on this topic. We're about to jump into another segment called I Can't Ask My Sales Manager That. And I do want to put you on the spot here and ask you one more thing, though. In your view, what do you think is the best method for people that are listening now in the first 3 to 5 years to get a better grip on formulating insights? Is there any online resource? Are there any tools that you use? Is there anything that's, I suppose, you found helpful in terms of developing up your capability, being able to get a good understanding of consumer insights and what they are and how to use them?
So it's working with other people, working with strategic minds, working with insight minds. It is courses through the Media Federation or the Communications Council in this country certainly can help. There are short courses that I've done online. They can sometimes be the universities also offer one-day courses, that sort of thing. But also it's working with other people who work in that area a lot and just through osmosis, learning from those people some of their techniques. Because in my experience working with a lot of strategic people there, a lot of people have different techniques on how they get there. But fundamentally they all keep asking, why is that?
And that's such a good segue into what I was going to sort of follow up, because I mean, certainly within my team, one thing that we do a lot is brainstorm. 15, 20 times a week we might brainstorm on average. And typically going into the room, what I'd say is if you don't have an insight ready to go or a challenge statement ready to go to then create an idea, to then brainstorm off, don't be afraid to devote the first part of the brainstorm to really just discussing the category, the consumer, the product. Get a good understanding, ask the question why, try to bring in different points of view, different people at different life stages with different interests, create that natural tension in the room and actually debate the differences. I mean, that what you said there around just talk to people, have conversation, I think we often forget that most insights can actually be born from that.
They absolutely can. In my experience, it rarely happens in isolation. The crafting of the words might happen, with the strategic team, but it's certainly through that discussion and debate with other people that has led to some of the best ones I've seen.
Have you, in your experience, if you're working on a particular category, have you gone out into the field? If you're working with an FMCG brand, or if you're working with a particular product that you're not familiar with, have you ever just gone out and walked the halls of a supermarket? Or
Absolutely. You can't unearth great insight sitting at your desk. Getting out there amongst the buying situation or getting out amongst the people is absolutely where you need to be. It helps you understand the buying scenario. And the example you just gave about supermarkets, absolutely have done that before. Shop-alongs in supermarkets, with mums to see what's their process for, filling the trolley, what's their process for navigating aisles, when do they choose certain brands and certain products, does it happen in a timely fashion? This observation of human behaviour is incredibly valuable in actually unearthing what the real insight is and why people are doing something, rather than sitting in, the office and trying to work it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it allows you to connect the dots. There's an incredible amount of research that we have access to, and you can run all that data based on, different systems. You can do that at your desk, but you can't actually connect the dots till you actually observe the behaviour in the real world. And whether that's shop-alongs, whether that's through focus groups, whether that's doing even a virtual online panel, there are a number of different ways that you can start to approach that sort of thing.
To get that understanding.
Yeah.
And so when media suppliers are coming into you, Janelle, and they're having conversations around their audience profile or this great piece of research they've done, or maybe they're coming in to put forward a proactive idea for a concept they want to get up that they think is great for your client, do you typically feel like that process is underwhelming, could be refined? Is there anything that you, as somebody who's typically seeing a lot of media suppliers come out and talk around audience insights, is there anything you think's missing that the audience listening to this podcast could potentially interpret and start to translate into their own sales process?
I think it's the listening up front. Sometimes with media suppliers coming into the agency in particular, they followed a certain process that they might have, and there's rigor around their research, but may not necessarily understand the issue or the challenge that you're trying to solve enough to marry that up.
Match them.
And that first session, to me, as a quick kickoff session, is absolutely critical.
And so for people who work in a media business that maybe has a content so I'm thinking a digital media business that has produces content, or print, or people who work in radio where there's a bit of a content arm, and a lot of the solutions they're putting forward might be integrated into that content. Do you find that there's some real value with people coming in and just speaking more broadly around what some of the insights are for why people choose to engage with that content, and how they choose to engage with it, and what the content pillars are? Like, does that actually translate for you when you're thinking about a client's brief? Do you go, I've got a good understanding of how this publisher crafts and creates their content? Or do you think that it's really up to the media salesperson to just create a bit of a relevance as to those two things and how they work?
Love hearing from the content creators and how they create, because they, to me, understand the audience better than anyone else. And when you're looking at a particular problem and you understand the type of consumer or the type of person that you're trying to attract, understanding then how that will connect all the way through to the moment that person that you're trying to impact is consuming the content is vital. And connecting those dots, it's not just the media salesperson's job, it's their job to orchestrate that, but then hearing from the person who creates the content, that's vital, because they're at the coalface. Definitely use your specialists within your organisation to help you. You don't have to do it all on your own.
Fantastic. Well, look, I think we've got right into that. That's a really good, we've kept asking the question of why, which is obviously the tip there. We're going to jump into the next segment now.
I can't ask my sales manager that.
Okay, so we're in the regular segment of I can't ask my sales manager that. Now, Janelle, acknowledging you're not a sales manager, the context for this one was when we actually wanted to create the podcast, we put a pretty extensive survey out to people in the first 5 years of media sales. And one of the questions in the Survey Monkey was, what's something that you just don't feel comfortable asking your manager? And I think we can agree that in any sort of an organization, in media, in any business, there's just certain things you can't ask your boss, be it political dynamics, be it through fear of probably projecting that you know a lot more than you do. So we just thought it'd be good to have a forum. And what we want to do here is sort of throw a question out that somebody has submitted, and then you and I just kind of tackle in real time. So this is from Karen in Townsville. And I'm going to start now. I work in regional media and sell into an agency and direct client base. The main product we sell is community press and magazines with some very basic digital and social. We have circulation figures on our main news titles, but we don't have any data around audience, income, occupation, interests, etc. I know that our product is better than our competitors, in brackets, better journalism, targeting a more affluent consumer. But I don't have any data to validate this audience profile back to my clients. As a result, we're always negotiating based on price. How do you sell audience value without good data? So very much one that I wanted to kind of hold out until I had a chance to chat to you, because it is an interesting dynamic there. Somebody that's going, look, I know our content reaches this audience. I know from my experience selling this media that we're targeting this more affluent audience as well. Potentially we've had some great feedback from clients. But when you don't have those data points at your fingertips and you don't have that third-party data, the job can become very difficult. So do you have any thoughts around how Karen here could tackle this issue? Because it seems to me like it's just a lack of that resource.
It absolutely is. And I don't think it's good enough to say I don't have any data. You certainly can't. How could you possibly know that you're better than your competitors and that you're targeting a more affluent audience without the data to prove it? So if you're doing that and you're just selling purely on price, then you're in a race to the bottom. There's no longevity in that. So I would say it's no longer good enough to sell on goodwill, likability, or I reckon this will work. You need to turn that I reckon factor into I know. So if you aren't officially audited or surveyed, commission your own, survey your readers. You've got a community newspaper, put it in the paper. Survey your social community and go in and talk to your sales manager about getting this kind of data. Use a third party researcher to help you, or get an insight specialist to help you do that, because ultimately, great selling, you need that support, because data is essential. I would say it's just not good enough. You're not going to get anywhere. So you need to make headway. There's no excuse for not having it. Data it's the new oil, and without it, you won't keep the sales engine running, because you can't prove why you can charge more or why you are different beyond, I know we're targeting this. I think we're targeting this. I reckon we're targeting this. I think we're doing this better. That's no longer going to cut it in today's agency. Even the smallest businesses in this country have their own data to fuel their businesses. So they're going to expect it all the way through up to big agencies who will expect it. So they won't accept a sell without some good data.
So the feedback there, and I say this with a fairly limited understanding of this scenario, but the feedback sounds very much like you need to maybe hold your sales manager in the business a bit more accountable to providing you with some sort of data capture that you can use to validate what your audience is.
Give you the tools to sell your proposition. It's as simple as that.
But I think what you said there, and this is the thing, we look at it and we go, okay, circulation data or some sort of partnering with a Nielsen or something like that, maybe that's not an option to this organization. That's fine, but you can still be pragmatic. What you said around survey monkeys, around case studies, around other testimonials, even in the short to medium term, some of those tactics could actually just help you just validate the fact that your medium maybe does have a bit of a differentiator. You've got to kind of substantiate that. You can't just go, our content targets a more premium audience, therefore you're reaching a more valuable consumer.
Yeah. Definitely. You've definitely got to be able to validate it. And things like case studies and testimonials, they're good. They're a bridge, but I certainly would be looking at, longer term, how you can survey your own readers, at least to get a dipstick on that.
Yeah.
Spend a little bit of money to make a little bit of money.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. The other thing I would add to that, and the only reason I add this is because I've discovered it the other day, is, ANZ, NAB, all the big four banks, they all offer a ton of resources and a ton of different transaction data and industry category data and white papers on different industries and categories as well. So something that's just worth considering there as a resource is head on to NAB Business Insights, think about the clients and the market that you're selling into, and have a bit of a read about some of that category data, because you're certainly not using it to sell your medium, but it's going to help you have a better understanding of the client base that you're selling into and their industry. And sometimes I think there's so much resource available at our fingertips that things like that can really help you in the short to medium term. Just go in and engage that client in a way that you can still add some meaningful value and some interesting data points to formulate a conversation around. One of the great examples I heard of this being used recently was somebody went on to ANZ Business Insights and they actually looked at the cafe category. And they found out that, you see a massive drop in transactions over the Christmas period because all these private cafes shut down. It just happens they're a coffee chain that they were putting a solution to. And suddenly they're in market for those 6 or 7 days when all the other cafes are closed and the supply is restricted. So that's a really different approach. Granted, it's a tactical play, but it's a good example of how sometimes data just used with the right application can really help you get an edge and can help you validate why you would come in and put a recommendation forward. Awesome. Well, Janelle, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Jamie.
How did you find the podcast experience? It's more daunting than I think most people realize, coming in and having a microphone in your face and being expected to act normal. You did a great job. It's clearly like a real passion of yours, this area. And I think, the audience listening at home, I would have to say this will separate the really, really, really good salespeople from the ones that really struggle, is getting a good understanding of how to formulate really good, actionable insights to help not only produce your solutions to a client brief, but also to help validate that, to help you understand your audience and to help you have a more meaningful dialogue with clients around it. And Janelle, I think it can't really be captured in a single kind of wrap-up statement, but I'd love to hear if there's any thoughts or any final kind of recommendation you'd have for the audience listening around what you think they can do and what would be the main takeaway from this podcast that they can instantly apply to help them get a better understanding of audience insight and how to use it in a media sales application.
Yeah, I think, get to know the people that you're selling to. Get to know them first as human beings. Get to know their business, listen to their needs, and work out how you can help them, because that's really critical before you even get into developing insights and developing ideas. Actually understanding who you're selling to and what it is they need and how you can help is that's step number one. And if you can't crack that, it won't go much further.
You know what's interesting, and this is a final thought, but when we start talking about, we're talking about audience insights here, but you've reached a really, really interesting intersection there of going, you've got to know who you're selling to as well. And oftentimes the insight is actually going to come from what's the political dynamic in the room you're presenting to, and how do you actually craft your solution to not only show the consumer insight, but to actually connect it with the decision maker in the room to make sure they buy into it, they interpret it, they feel that it's validated and that it actually has some level of thought and rigor behind it. So really good point. Janelle, people might want to reach out to you. Do you mind if they do that? They might want to pick your brain further.
Not at all.
Where can they reach you? LinkedIn?
Yes.
LinkedIn. So Janelle Shinners, thank
Correct.
you so much for your time. I will also just let everybody know, head to mediasalesmastery.com. We've got show notes from today. I'll make sure that if anyone wants to speak to Janelle, I can put you in touch directly as well. And Janelle, we thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Jamie.
Okay, that was this week's episode on Data Tells, Insight Sells. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and make sure you head to mediasalesmastery.com to email us any questions you might have. We're eager to hear from those of you who want to help pick the topic and guide the show.
You've been listening to Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. Head to mediasalesmastery.com to help pick the topic, guide the show, and don't forget to subscribe to receive new episodes each week.